Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, although watching what's going on in one particular city in America, Seattle, Washington, there are other cities where they say that autonomous zones will be established. That remains to be seen, but at least in the city of Seattle, it has now gone from 6 occupied blocks of the 13th biggest city in America to 7 occupied blocks. The civil authorities, if you can call them that, people like Jenny Durkin, the mayor, and others, have simply agreed to surrender and step back. The police chief has stepped back. The mayor has stepped back. And they've said, okay, we'll let them have it. We're not even going to try to take it away from them. Well, the question is, what do you do when you have people in that neighborhood who want no part of this protest, riot, putting up a wall and guarding it with armed vigilantes? And, of course, the mainstream media isn't talking about this at all the way they did, say, the occupation of a wildlife refuge out in the middle of nowhere. No, they're talking about it as, oh, this is wonderful. It's like a summer of love, and we can have peace, and everybody can smoke dope, and we'll vandalize everything, and there won't be any legal response at all. GianCarlo Canaparo is a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. GianCarlo, welcome back to the program.
Lars, thanks for having me.
So is any of this illegal enough that we could have some civil authority take charge of this situation again? And what's your take on why they've decided, as a political move, to say, no, we're just going to let a large section of a major American city be taken over and occupied? And the mayor has actually joked that this could go on all summer.
Right. You've definitely got a problem here where there are political forces at play on the left that for politicians, particularly Democrats, it just makes it impossible for them to take a stand against this kind of thing. For reasons I don't really understand, they are impossible with, in the same voice, saying, I denounce unjust uses of force by the police. I denounce unjust killings, but at the same time, I will not stand by violence. They can't do that, and I don't know why. But
when you say they can't do it, legally they'd be justified, but you're saying from a political standpoint, they get uncomfortable. But isn't that the same as if you had a conservative government in a state, Texas, Idaho, and some group took over a large section and they were right-wing militia? The governor could still say, I'm for your Second Amendment rights, I'm for your private property rights, but we will not allow this kind of thing to go on, even if you may philosophically agree with some of what that group said. All of a sudden, right-wing militia groups are completely anathema, but left-wing groups, they're cool.
Right. Well, I certainly hope that any governor who supports the Second Amendment would be able to say just that. I support your rights. I don't support you taking over. And I don't support the use of violence. But what we're seeing here is just the opposite. There is a lot of political sympathy in Seattle for this movement. When it comes to the legal ramifications, there are a lot in terms of civil liability. Obviously, anyone whose business is damaged in this can try to sue the protesters for what that's worth. I don't think you're going to get very far. You're not going to, get blood from a turnip. But when it comes to legal recourse from the city, unfortunately, or the state, things really don't look good. Because to prevail on those sort of economic theories from a state, you really have to prove that the state consciously deprived you of your property. What the state is doing here is simply abdicating its responsibility to protect you and your property from assault. And unfortunately, as much as that is in effect a deprivation of your right to your property. Unfortunately, the way courts have interpreted the Constitution's protections for those rights, they're more or less meaningless, more or less impervious to that kind of lawsuit.
So, and when you said responsibility, in legal point of fact, do any of these civil authorities, like a mayor or a city council, actually have a defined responsibility to respond and take back property that's been taken over in this way? Because my understanding, I think I understood the law that they can say, well, we try to do what we can. But if a citizen, haven't there been some suits where citizens have said, I called the cops and they didn't come to my house? And the answer was, the court said they're not obligated to come to your house.
Right, you're right. And that's the unfortunate situation we're in, where you have people who are, their businesses or their homes in this area have been vandalized. and they have no recourse. There's really nothing that they can do. And as long as these city councilors are in office supporting and protecting these protesters and stopping the police from going in, these people are really up the proverbial creek.
Is there any case to be made that they're aiding and abetting, say, kidnapping? Because there are people within these districts who've written to me, not very many because they're all afraid that if they're identified, they'll be targeted, that they've said they have to run this gauntlet of private citizens, thugs and vigilantes with guns who are screening everybody who goes in and out. And their property has been damaged. They're being told they can't come and go freely. That would seem to me to be a violation of their civil rights, which seems like the kind of thing that would justify either Bill Barr, the Attorney General, acting, or the President acting to say, in the same way that in Little Rock, Arkansas, you had people standing there saying, those little brown kids are not going to school in these public schools, that the president said, we're going to send the military if necessary to make sure they can, because you are depriving them of a civil right. In this case, you have citizens in their homes and their workplaces who are being deprived in the same way. Different mechanism, but they're also being deprived, aren't they?
Right. You hit on a good point, which is that there are federal laws here that could be used. And I would be very surprised if Bill Barr was not already investigating what is going on. Because if the facts are, as you said, then if there is widespread rioting going on, if there are kidnappings going on, if there is any sort of interstate hook, meaning that these people traveled from out of state, or they're doing harm to businesses that transact businesses across state lines, then the federal government can get involved and prosecute these people. And
although GianCarlo, Little Rock didn't none of those kids were going to school across state lines. They were just American citizens who were not having the freedom to go to a public school. Right? So there it didn't even take the nexus of crossing state lines. You just said those are American citizens. They're being deprived of their rights. And again, we've heard plenty of stories of people saying, I can't freely come and go to my private property, whether it's a home or a business, within this autonomous zone.
Right. And so you would hope that something is done about that. Unfortunately, where things get really tricky is that the president's authority to simply send in the troops is curtailed. And quite frankly, when it comes to, say, the Insurrection Act and sending in the military proper, that raises a host of concerns, namely that it will be seen as politicizing the military, which, the military is probably the one institution in America that still retains broad public trust. You don't want to risk that. You also, the military isn't trained for this sort of thing. Really, the best option is for the National Guard to go in. And we'll see if Trump does that. I think that right now we have no appetite from the governor of Washington to do that. I think he's more or less content to pretend that this isn't happening. So we're going to have.
Let me ask you real quick while we got the second about the National Guard, though, GianCarlo. They're under the control of the governor until the president federalizes them. But if he federalizes the National Guard in that state, doesn't he take control of the National Guard within a state when they federalize it?
That's right. That is how that would happen. But there are concerns here in that. To what extent do you want the president to do that, for 6 blocks? To what extent are, the people of Washington ultimately responsible for electing these officials
idiots
who, don't want to deploy them?
Understood. GianCarlo Canaparo, thank you very much. I appreciate the time. He's a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. You've got the Lars Larson Show. Your phone calls, naysayers go first, at 866-439-5277.